some swing state polls that show what I think most of us expected, that actually the president of the United States and his performance in the State of the Union address was going to impact Americans and undercut this lie that he somehow was a doddering old man that couldn't complete a sentence. This lie that the Republicans continued to push actually now appears to be backfiring.
Let's briefly check in on that. This is new general election polling showing a neck-and-neck battle for swing states between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. In the latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, Trump and President Biden are tied at 45% in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And in Wisconsin, Biden leads by a single point, which is within the margin of error. So an uptick.
Yeah, an uptick. And let's keep those three states up there because there are other swing state polls taken. Biden still, he's down 2 in Nevada, a little bit further behind in other states. Trump is maintaining his lead in the state of Georgia. Gene Robinson, though, as you look at these numbers, these are the 3 states that matter. If Joe Biden wins these 3 states, Donald Trump is that is the so-called blue wall that everyone talked about in 2012 that would never be broken until Donald Trump did it 4 years later. But you look in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those numbers breaking Biden's way. And I suspect, we've talked about how confident the Biden team has been all along when everybody else has been ready to panic and run for the hills. Right now, at least, this poll suggests that these voters and these polls suggest that maybe they know what they're talking about.
Maybe they do. Maybe the Biden political team actually is pretty good at politics. There must be a giant sigh of relief. Certainly lots of welcoming noises from inside the White House this morning about those polls. As you said, those are states that President Biden has to carry. Polls in Michigan, especially, and in Pennsylvania, had been scary for the White House for a while, but they were quite confident. The political team was quite confident that things would turn around, that Democrats would come home to President Biden as time went on. And so now we're still in March. There's still a long time to go, but with the needle moving in what they would see as the right direction, I think there'll be some smiles about this in the White House, along obviously with deep concern about what's happening in Baltimore. It's a busy news day, as you said.
It is a busy news day. And Willie, it's so interesting when we've talked about this since 2015, that Donald Trump always runs against people who stand there stiff and take it. And when, he's a disruptor on the campaign trail, and when he disrupts, people sit back and say, oh, he shouldn't be mean. The Biden campaign, I saw a couple of days ago when Donald Trump was bragging about another one of his club trophies, where I suppose if you're a member, you have to let Donald Trump win because he wins all of his club championships. And he's bragging it, and, Joe Biden just mockingly goes, nice job, Donald, or something like that. But yesterday, after Donald Trump came out and ranting and raving and claiming that he was Jesus and all this other stuff, as Drudge put it, this is what they said. And I guarantee you, Donald Trump is not used to the incoming that he's facing every day. Quote, Donald Trump is weak and desperate, both as a man and a candidate for president. He spent the weekend golfing, the morning comparing himself to Jesus, and the afternoon lying about having money that he definitely doesn't have. His campaign can't raise money. He is uninterested in campaigning outside his country club. And every time he opens his mouth, he pushes moderate and suburban voters away with his dangerous agenda. America deserves better than a feeble, confused, and tired Donald Trump. And I must say on that last part, there have been people who have been irritated, and count me as one of them, that there are countless stories about Joe Biden after the Hur report being old and feeble, and oh, poor man, he can't remember the things that I can't remember, the things that well, I won't say you're a young man, but the things that a lot of us can't remember in a 5-hour deposition, we have to be asked about it. And yet it's Joe Biden campaigning day by day by day, going to event after event after event. It's Donald Trump who has been holed up in his country club and holed up in other places, only holding one event, and that's an event that he held for a Senate candidate because they don't have the money right now to put on a lot of these events.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism of Joe Biden was that he was the basement candidate. That was from the Trump campaign in 2020. This is the beach club candidate in Donald Trump. He's running a presidential campaign from Mar-a-Lago. He's doing the occasional rally where he flies in for an hour and then flies right back to Mar-a-Lago, ostensibly sometimes for another candidate, but it always becomes about him and his persecution. You weren't exaggerating when you mentioned Jesus. He affirmatively reposted something from one of his supporters yesterday that suggested he, in fact, was a Christ-like figure taking the arrows for the people. But he's walking into a lot of this. We can play tape almost every day, including yesterday, when he was speaking at 40 Wall Street about the decision to have his bond changed. And it truly is objectively incoherent. If you watch the full clips, even if you watch one of his rallies, I'm not sure this is a fight he wants to have, talking about Joe Biden being a doddering old man. And clearly, as you just read in that tweet, the Biden campaign is happy to have this fight too, Jonathan Lemire. So there has been, it appears at least in recent weeks, a shift in posture from the Biden campaign being much more aggressive, especially on this issue of age and mental fitness for the job.
Yeah, and the president himself has gotten far more aggressive in taking it to Trump. His new favorite joke that President Biden has been trotting out at fundraisers and the like is he talks about his efforts to relieve student debt. And he says a man approaches him on the street and says, look, I'm in debt. I owe all this money. And Biden says, well, sorry, Donald, I can't help you. So we have seen this, and a rapid response team that has grown in the Wilmington campaign headquarters, and they're taking it to Trump every chance they get. And these numbers are what his aides, Biden's aides, thought were coming. The first and foremost mission of the State of the Union address was to reassure nervous Democrats, to show them, look, the president is up for the job. He can deliver a strong performance. Clearly, that happened. A lot of the whispers that Biden even should step aside, that's all vanished. There's much more confidence in the party now that he's up for this fight. And then they thought, well, let's accompany that with a 2-week blitz of campaign travel. And he has been all over, basically to every single swing state, while Donald Trump, to Joe's point, has only held one event, and they had to pull down another, one that was scheduled for Arizona. They had to cancel it because they didn't have the money to pay for it. And that is a real concern for Trump world, is that President Biden and his team have a massive cash advantage, and the president has a major fundraiser.
Jonathan,
yes.
Jonathan, did you just say Donald Trump? You have reporting that Donald Trump had to cancel an event, the only event would have had on his own in a long time. He had to pull it down because they didn't have the money to run the event.
It was an event that was not publicized yet. It had not been officially announced, but they were planning an Arizona event that they had to pull down because they couldn't afford it. They thought they didn't want to use their resources there. So it was not that it had been advertised yet, but still, this was something they wanted to do. And they couldn't. They didn't because they decided to use their resources elsewhere.
Have you ever heard of a political campaign that didn't have the money to run political rallies?
Well, let's recall that there are some in the Trump world that feel like, let's remember, Trump had a cash disadvantage in 2020 as well and had to go dark for a few weeks that fall. They had to pull down advertising. And they think there are some in the Trump world who think that was one of the differences why they lost, is they had to go dark there for a stretch in September, early October, while Biden and his team were advertising nonstop. And that's going to happen again this time around. It's very clear that the Democrats are going to have a major fundraising advantage. In fact, President Biden is appearing in New York City later this week with former presidents Obama and Clinton, and what they hope will be their biggest single fundraiser to date, which will just pad that advantage. And we should note we're seeing some reflection there in the polls. Georgia, Democrats tell me, remains concerned. I think that they feel like Georgia may be out of reach this time around, Joe and Mika, but they feel like other states in play, in particular that blue wall, where they're seeing movement, even in a state, Michigan, where they know they've had trouble because of the Gaza conflict.
Yeah, they're going to have some problems, at least right now in Georgia and in Arizona, two strong Republican-leaning states that went Democratic in 2020. Concerns there. Nevada, of course, though, I always say when people always predict that Nevada is going to go to Republicans by 2 points in presidential races, I always talk about somehow Democrats, if it's within 2 points, that is I'm giving that to the Democrats because they always seem to pull it out there because of organization. But again, make no mistake, let's put those 3 states up again, Dan. Those 3 states, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. This is the election right here. These are the 3 states that determine who the next president of the United States is going to be. If Joe Biden wins those 3 states, he's the next president.
Later this morning, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments regarding the abortion medication mifepristone in a case that's been nearly a year in the making. The court's ruling could have drastic consequences to those seeking an abortion, even in states that still allow it post-Roe, causing several governors across the country to stockpile abortion medications in an effort to safeguard women's access to reproductive health care. Joining us, one of those governors, Kathy Hochul, Democrat of New York. Also with us, the co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Simone Sanders Townsend. Governor, we're going to get to the mifepristone story in just a moment and what else is happening with that. But first, I want to ask you about the bridge collapse in Baltimore. Have you had any contact with state officials in Maryland? Just your reaction.
Yes, I reached out to the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, who's a good friend, and offered any assistance from the state of New York. He expressed his gratitude. I said we're sending our prayers to everyone involved. And, you think about the vulnerability of construction workers. We do everything we can in our states to protect these workers, but an incident like this puts them in such harm's way. So for the families and all the individuals affected and the long-term effect, the New York Harbor stands ready to assist any way we can continue the flow of commerce so it's not disrupted. We have over 66 bridges in our harbor area, so we know the vulnerability of what can happen when one is down. So we're there to help the people of Maryland. I offered this to the governor just a short time ago.
Okay, appreciate that. Of course, we're following this breaking news story and we'll bring new developments. And as the governor pointed out, there is a lot of concern about the construction workers who were on the bridge at the time of the collapse. The video showing the collapse happened in dramatic fashion, and there was literally seconds before much of the bridge was submerged. Again, this is Baltimore Harbor right now live, and this is the moment in which the cargo ship slammed into part of the bridge, and you can see the construction area there, all of it just completely going down into the water. We know of one person who is in the hospital, and there's now a search for others, vehicles that are submerged in the water, and again, those construction workers. Governor Hochul, I now want to continue about the Supreme Court oral arguments that we're hearing today about the abortion medication mifepristone. What can you tell us about what drugs New York might be stockpiling to protect a woman's ability to choose to use a type of drug like this in the case that she might need it?
Well, I'll tell you this. Last year, right around this time, when we first received word that not only was Dobbs taken away from women, the Dobbs decision taking away the women's right to have a surgical abortion, many women turned to the alternative. In fact, now 2/3 of all abortions in the United States are by medication abortion. So, of course, these extremists now go after this. So what we did in New York a year ago was to start stockpiling 150,000 doses of medication abortion, so it's available. We also protect our doctors because our doctors are protected by a shield law if they want to prescribe to women in other states. We will protect them if they use telehealth services. So we want to make sure that women's access to reproductive freedom is not hampered. But the hypocrisy of these judges, and if the Supreme Court doesn't overturn the decision of a unmedically trained judge in Texas, we need to understand that this is not just going to affect the red states. This is something that I will not be able to stop. I can have all the freedoms we want for surgical abortions in the state of New York, and we do, and we'll protect them. But if they outlaw the most commonly used form over this prescription approved by the FDA, a trusted source that has been approving medications and prescriptions for dozens and dozens of years, then I can't offer this in our state. I've stockpiled, but think about the effect that it'll have all across America on women. And this is a bridge too far, speaking of bridges today.
Yeah. So, Governor, you get it. Simone, you get it. I get it. In fact, on Morning Mika, we were talking about Eva Birch, the state senator who needed an abortion because she had fetal abnormalities that would cause a miscarriage. And it seems as more vivid and more clear as the need for abortion medication and abortion procedures becomes. It just seems like those who are in power making decisions like this, they seem to become dumber. I mean, what more does one need to say to explain that this is part of a health care choice that women need in order to live, survive, not have trauma, not have mental health issues, and also not have perhaps a fetus that goes to term and then dies as suffering?
I mean, Mika, that's why the stories, I believe, are so important. State Senator Birch in Arizona went to the floor to tell her story and essentially educate her colleagues because she said there were many people that didn't really realize, her colleagues realized how a woman's body worked or why one would need an abortion. If you look at the map that's on the screen right now, folks, the abortion restrictions and the bans cover most of this country. So, Governor Hochul, when we're having this conversation and we're looking at this map, it is states like New York State that are not just, protecting abortion access, healthcare access for the folks who live in New York, but also for people that decide to travel in. Talk about, I know there was a bill at the top of the year that was passed by the New York State legislature that also protected, guarded against some of these travel bans that other states have put in place to restrict access for folks who potentially travel to New York to receive health care services that are an abortion.
New York State is a safe harbor. This is what I announced right after the Dobbs decision. I announced $35 million to beef up the services here in New York, knowing that we'd be the place for freedom refugees. I mean, these are women seeking freedom over their own body. And so we're going to continue supporting them. But as I mentioned, it's one thing to provide abortion services, but if they outlaw the distribution of mifepristone as a result of the Supreme Court decision, which we'll hear about in June, if they go that far, then what options do I have? I have 150,000 doses stockpiled, but it should not come to this. And we are becoming now a state of haves and have-nots. Some states have freedom, some do not, based on your governor. But if this Supreme Court listens to this judge in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, to dictate to all of us that our freedoms that we fought for decades and decades are gone, I'm going to tell you this. Don't underestimate the rage of women in this country. They will march. They will take to the streets. They will protest. And there will be electoral consequences because Donald Trump appointed 243 federal judges, of which one of them this judge in Texas was, and the Supreme Court. There will be a rebellion against this oppression of women in this country in this next election, and Republicans are going to suffer the consequences of what they've done.
And we will hear those oral arguments coming up in just a couple of hours. We'll hear those live here on MSNBC. And taking a step even further back, this would be quite a precedent to say that a regional judge, somewhere a state judge, could override the authority of the FDA on any drug now. Now pick your list of drugs. New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Governor, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
So moments from now, the Supreme Court will be hearing arguments regarding access to the abortion medication mifepristone. The Biden administration and the medications manufacturer are pushing to reverse a lower court's decision that would make it harder to obtain the drug. The lower court said the Food and Drug Administration failed to follow the procedures needed to loosen its regulations concerning the medication. Should the Supreme Court rule with the lower court, it would likely cut off prescriptions for the pill via telehealth and mail services, another hit to women's health. Joining us now, NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who is live outside the Supreme Court. Also with us, former acting U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC legal analyst Neil Katyal. He has argued 50 cases before the Supreme Court. And former senior aide to both Biden and Clinton campaigns, Adrian Elrod, to the politics of this. And obviously, I just want to say to our three guests that we're covering the catastrophic bridge collapse after it was hit by a cargo ship at 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. We are awaiting Governor Wes Moore of Maryland to do a news conference. There's so many angles to this story as it impacts the families affected by those who were killed and those who are still missing, as well as commerce and the economy and the fact that this is a major thoroughfare up the eastern seaboard. So we will be interrupting when the governor takes to the microphones. Having said that, Yamiche set the scene for us as to what's going to be happening today at the Supreme Court.
Well, good morning, Mika. The Supreme Court is hearing what is really the most consequential case regarding abortion to come before the court since it's overturned Roe v. Wade back in June 2022. The justices today are going to be deciding whether or not to maintain access to this abortion pill, mifepristone, in a wide way, in the way that the FDA has done. Now, the FDA originally approved this medication several decades ago, but in the last recent years, it has expanded access to that pill, making it, as you said, accessible via telehealth as well as via mail. The FDA says that it has a long, rigorous process for approving drugs, as well as a process that is safe and scientific when it comes to expanding access to this pill. But anti-abortion groups, soon after Roe v. Wade was overturned, sued the FDA in the effort to try to restrict access to this medication, abortion. And we should note why this is so important, because it's something like 63% of women, 6 out of 10 abortions that happen in this country happen, we've now learned, through medication abortion. And that number has gone up since Roe v. Wade was overturned. So we're talking about thousands of women whose access to this pill would be affected if the Supreme Court were to rule against the FDA here. The other thing to note is that there are a number of drug companies that have written friend of the court briefs to the Supreme Court because they're very worried that if the FDA loses this case, that not just mifepristone will be impacted, but that its authority to regulate drugs can be impacted, and that could have access and impact, rather, to a number of drugs, not just mifepristone. So a lot to be worried here. I will say one other thing, which is that there's the politics of this. You can probably hear there are so many protesters here. I come out to the Supreme Court to cover cases all the time. This is one of the biggest crowds that I've seen, so it really underscores what's at stake here, Mika.
We'll be talking to Adrian about that in just a moment. But Neil Katyal, given the overturning of Roe, is there a way to foresee how they may decide on this, or are there details that you might need to explain to us as to how this could go?
I think that this result is easy to foresee, and just by way of disclosure, I'm unabashedly against this challenge to this abortion drug. My law partner, Jess Ellsworth, is going to argue the case very shortly in the Supreme Court. And the reason why I think that this is an easy case is this drug has been around since the year 2000. It is so extensively studied. And one of the concepts in the law is a doctrine called standing, which is the idea that you've got to have a concrete injury to yourself in order to bring a case. The theory for why these challengers to the drug can challenge it is their doctors and their patients might take the drug and have side effects like headaches and the like. That is not a plausible theory. It would mean every doctor can challenge basically any drug, because every drug has side effects like headaches, and undo the entire system of pharmaceutical regulation in the United States. I just can't imagine the Supreme Court, and to be sure, it's basically the same Supreme Court that overturned overturned Roe and gave us the Dobbs decision. I can't imagine that they're going to say that this kind of challenge is okay. So I think they're going to look at it less as an abortion case, more as a pharmaceutical case, and close the door on a challenge like this. And that may have, any number of election benefits for the Republican Party as well. So, I think there are a bunch of different consequences to the decision, but I'd be very, very surprised if the challengers could survive the hearing today and let their lawsuit stand.
So, Adrian, let's indeed talk about the politics here. And we don't know how this is going to play out just yet. But certainly we know that since the Dobbs decision, Democrats have basically won every significant election, and abortion rights have played a huge part of almost all of them, including in some deep red states. So forecast, if you will, just the fact that this is in the ether, that we're talking about abortion rights again, putting that front and center on the national discourse, that has to be something that the Biden campaign is surely going to grab and make it part of their message as we head towards November.
Yeah, Lemire, you're exactly right. I mean, look, the Biden campaign is going to make it clear, as well as their surrogates, that the fact that the court is even looking at this case is a direct consequence of the fact that Donald Trump put 3 pro-life Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court. That is why we are in this situation to begin with. Obviously, Trump is trying to backpedal and say, oh, I support a 15-week abortion ban, which is flat out wrong, and we're not going to let him get away with that. But the bottom line is this. The court should reject this case. This drug is still available in states that allow abortion. Lemire, when I was doing a little bit of prep on this morning, and I was reading the fact that, yes, this drug is available in quote-unquote states that currently allow abortion. I mean, it's crazy that we are actually in this situation where we're talking about states that allow abortion and states that don't allow abortion. Again, that is a direct consequence of Donald Trump knowingly and consciously and very proactively, by the way, putting 3 pro-life Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court. So we're not going to let voters forget that Trump is responsible for this. This is because of him and his actions. And I think to your point, I mean, you look at states like Kansas, Ohio, states that are red states, purple states, whatever you want to call them, that, directly made it clear that we support women's reproductive health. We do not support getting rid of that access, and we're going to make that very clear. And, Lemire, when you look at the map this coming election cycle, you look at states like North Carolina, Florida looks very likely to have an abortion on the ballot as ballot access. This is going to be an issue that's going to play very effectively in this election, I think, for Democrats and certainly for President Biden, who has made it very clear that he supports a woman's right to make her own decisions about her body.
Adrian, I want to follow up, but first I want to go back to Yamiche. And if you could just describe the scene when you ended your report, you said there was quite a crowd there.
That's right, Mika. We are right in front of the Supreme Court, and right across from me, you can't see it on camera, but it is the Capitol, of course. So we have here sort of the justice with the legislative, and then in between that, you have hundreds and hundreds of protesters here. A lot of them are anti-abortion protesters, people who are hoping that the FDA loses and that access to this abortion pill gets taken away. But then you also, of course, have people who are really pushing for abortion access and hoping that the FDA succeeds in its quest to continue to have this abortion pill be widely accessible. So what you hear here is just number of people, women, men, all sorts of people in the crowd here. And I have to just underscore there are even some streets that are closed here that are usually open, and that's open during other sorts of arguments. I've seen, voting rights cases and tech cases and all sorts of cases come before the Supreme Court. But this is a very different scene, and it really tells you the level of enthusiasm and the level of interest when it comes to this issue of abortion and whether or not this pill is going to be accessible. So you can continue to hear it. There's music, boisterous, but it just reminds you that this is a live issue and that there are a lot of people who are watching the oral arguments today.
It's interesting, Adrian Elrod, it really feels the Democrats, and especially women, but also the men who love them, are making abortion rights a life issue, a matter of life and death for the woman involved.
Yeah, I mean, Mika, you and I both knew, and I think everyone certainly on this panel was well aware of what the consequences would be if Roe was overturned. We're not just talking about, teenagers that are getting pregnant and having abortions. We are talking about women who are trying to start families, women who are trying to expand their families, having a matter of life and death when it comes to, what's happening in their bodies. And when you're looking at, some of the, again, Republicans, I think, like to say these are unintended consequences, but we all knew that this was going to happen. When women are going to their doctors and their doctors are saying, we can't do anything to help you if you have an ectopic pregnancy or if you have a pregnancy that's putting you in danger, because we're afraid that we're going going to be arrested. We're afraid that we're going to lose our ability to, to practice medicine. These are the consequences we knew were going to happen. You had many groups like Planned Parenthood. You had, medical professionals across the country that were making it clear that this is exactly what would happen if Roe was overturned. And here we are today. So, again, when you look at the electoral consequences of this, Mika, look, I mean, the opposition knows they can't win in the court of public opinion. They have to go to the Supreme Court. They have to move their anti-abortion measures through the court system because it's certainly not going to win in the court of public opinion. So I hope Neil's right. I hope the Supreme Court does reject this today. But, the fact that we're even in this place speaks volumes about where Republicans stand on how they feel that a woman should make decisions about her own body. That is where we are today because of Donald Trump and the Republican majority that allowed these 3 Supreme Court justices to get through and sit on the Supreme Court today.
So, Neil, MSNBC, of course, will have live coverage of these oral arguments at the top of the hour. Just preview for our viewers, if you will, what exactly we'll hear. How will it go?
Yeah, so the court has allocated 60 minutes to the argument, and basically that's usually a half hour per side, and the court throws hard questions at both sides. This is going to go a lot longer than an hour, and there are 3 advocates. First, we're going to hear from Erin Hawley, who is a religious rights advocate. She's also married to Senator Josh Hawley. And she herself is a very serious lawyer. She clerked for Chief Justice Roberts, has argued a number of important cases and the like. She's going to argue that this drug should not have had the expansions in 2016 and later that allow the drug to be given over the mail and not just by doctors, but by nurse practitioners and the like. She's going to challenge that and say the doctors she represents are worried about the side effects from such a thing. We'll then hear from the Solicitor General to the United States, Elizabeth Prelogar, and my partner, Jess Ellsworth, and they're going to basically say that's wrong, that you can't open the floodgates in this way to these kinds of lawsuits, and then make the points about how important this drug is toward reproductive justice. And in a world in which Roe has been overturned and many states are imposing restriction after restriction, it's a drug like this that is the only mechanism for many of these women. And so it becomes even more important in a post-Dobbs environment for people to take the drug. And I expect we'll hear that argument toward this back half of the oral arguments today.
As the latest polling between President Biden and Donald Trump show the close races in several swing states, another barometer, money racing, shows it's not much of a contest at all, if you're looking just at that. Joining us now, former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst, Steve Ratner. So, Steve, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you that we have the February fundraising numbers in, and as you suggested, they're very good news for Joe Biden and not such good news for Donald Trump. So let's take a look at the scoreboard. So what you can see in February is that President Biden plus the Democratic National Committee together raised a total of $53 million versus only $31 million for the Republicans. So 60% more money raised in February for the Democrats versus the Republicans. And that continues a trend that's been going on throughout this cycle of Joe Biden substantially outraising Donald Trump. $248 million raised so far by the Biden campaign and the DNC versus just $92 million by Trump and his affiliated committees. And this is the, I'm sorry, that's the, and in terms of spending, you can see that Biden is spending a lot less. Biden has spent $92 million so far versus $125 million for Trump. So spending less and raising more than Trump, and that's not a good recipe for the Trump campaign.
And Steve, as you move to your second chart, it sort of explains perhaps why, because a lot of that money that Donald Trump is in fact raising is going to his legal fees.
Yeah, that is a little-known fact that should become a better-known fact so donors understand what's happening to their money. But first, take a look at the disparity in cash on hand. You can see that the Democrats have $155 million of cash on hand. The Republicans just $48 million. I heard you talking earlier about Trump perhaps canceling a rally because he didn't have the money. You can see his money actually went down for a good while, and it's just ticked up very, very slightly here. The raising more, spending less has a lot to do with it, but Willie, as you said, legal fees have something to do with this too. So here's how it works. Trump has a committee called the Trump 47 Committee, which does all of the joint fundraising between Trump and the RNC. But what is not well known, and you can look all through the fine print and you really won't understand this, is how it works. The first $6,600 that somebody gives goes to the Trump campaign, what we used to call hard money. It's primary technically in general, but $6,600. The next $5,000 that someone gives goes to the Save America PAC. And that Save America PAC has been shuttling its money over into Trump's legal fees. I think it's about $47 million last I looked that actually is being paid for his legal fees. So if you give $10,000, a lot of your money is going to end up in Trump's legal fees. And then after that, money goes to the RNC and the state committees. But this is pretty well hidden in anything you can find in the Trump documents.
That's fascinating and so important, as you say, for people to know. That's where your money's going. You think you're supporting a presidential campaign. Now you're trying to support Donald Trump staying out of jail for the most part, and perhaps, Steve, why the Financial Times reported a few weeks ago that he has 200,000 fewer donors at this time in the campaign than he did 4 years ago. They don't want their money going to legal fees. So let's move to your last chart. Trump is ahead among small donors. What's the spread there, Steve?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and this is something that the Biden campaign, I'm sure, is focused on and is thinking about, because it is a change in what's been happening before. But if you look at small donors, and these are people who give $200 or less, the Biden campaign is significantly lagging the Trump campaign in this one category. And that is very different than what happened in 2020 in the cycle, and this is the full cycle for 2020, where the Biden campaign substantially outraised Trump among small donors. So there is a shift here, and it may reflect the enormous passion of Trump's base and some of the issues Biden may be having with his small donors. But on the big donor side, it's the opposite. And you can see on the big donor side, interestingly, Biden has just crushed Trump. And so the people who are financially better off, able to give more, really are not enthusiastic at all about Trump. Biden outraised Trump in the last cycle among this group as well, but not by nearly the margin that he's outraising him.
Steve.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.